The 35-year-old wildlife photographer had been adjusting his camera on the muddy river bank, unaware that he was about to face a moment that would change his life forever. In a split second that would define everything, Rowan spotted a young brown bear cub slip and tumble into the river's raging current, its tiny body swept away without mercy after a night of heavy rains drenched the wilderness. For 8 years, he had lived and worked in Yellowstone and Kenya, capturing nature's raw beauty through his lens, steadfastly following one unbreakable rule: observe, never interfere. That principle had guided his entire career until this moment. The bear cub, barely 5 months old, had wandered too close to the edge when the ground suddenly gave way beneath its paws. The torrent seized it instantly. Its panicked cries pierced through every line Rowan had drawn to separate his humanity from his profession. Without a second thought, he dropped his camera and dove into the roaring river. "I couldn't just stand there and watch it drown," Rowan later told officials. "In that moment, my human instinct overpowered everything I'd ever learned about wildlife photography." It was a deeply emotional act, one fraught with danger. The Yellowstone River, especially during the rainy season, was infamous for its deadly ferocity. Its hidden currents and unpredictable swells had claimed countless lives, both animal and human. As Rowan struggled toward the cub, a drifting tree branch suddenly slammed into his left shoulder, sending a jolt of pain that left him reeling. He faltered, nearly collapsing from the blow, exhaustion, and the sheer cold. But one thing remained unshaken inside him: the will to save that tiny creature. Drained and battered, he summoned the last of his strength to reach the cub. The little bear, weakened from gulping too much water, clung to Rowan's neck with a force he never would have expected from something so small. Soaked fur pressed against his chest, Rowan could feel the rapid thump of the cub's heart, a frantic rhythm that echoed like a plea for survival. He turned toward the shore, beginning the treacherous journey back. The icy current tugged relentlessly, dragging him toward deeper, darker waters, where unseen dangers, like crocodile jaws lying in wait, could strike at any moment. Unbeknownst to Rowan, someone, or something, was watching. Not far away, hidden among tall grasses and dense acacia trees, 5 female brown bears stood motionless. They had heard the terrified cries of the lost cub and tracked its scent all the way to the river's edge. They had been searching frantically for their missing little one, and now they had arrived just in time to witness Rowan hauling it from the raging current. As he finally staggered into the shallows near the bank, barely able to breathe, Rowan looked up and froze. Before him stood not just 5 fully grown female bears, but also one massive brown bear, colossal, powerful, and calm, yet undeniably menacing. The group formed a wide arc at the water's edge. Their deep-set eyes locked onto Rowan, unblinking, tracking his every move. His heart pounded as he tried to calculate what to do next, but he quickly realized he had no choice. Waist-deep in the river, a bear cub in his arms, and 6 adult bears between him and safety. Any wrong move could trigger a deadly charge. The largest female bear, clearly the leader, slowly stepped toward the water's edge. Rowan held his breath. Time seemed to freeze. One single thought echoed in his mind: this might be the end. Everyone knows mother bears are fiercely protective. And now, standing before them, was a stranger, holding one of their fragile cubs in his arms. Every bit of knowledge, every instinct Rowan had ever learned about bear behavior screamed the same thing: there's no way out of this. But then something extraordinary happened. Something no book, no field study on wild bears could have ever predicted. The mother bear showed no signs of aggression. Instead, in her eyes, Rowan saw something he never imagined he'd witness in a predator. Not anger, not suspicion, but something closer to recognition, perhaps even gratitude. The cub began to whimper, soft, high-pitched cries that reached out toward its kin. And that sound changed everything. Fortunately, Rowan's waterproof action camera, strapped to his chest harness, was recording every impossible second. The mother bear began to step into the water. Her massive paws pressed gently into the surface, sending quiet ripples across the current. Rowan remained frozen, braced for the worst, but the attack never came. The bear stopped just a few feet away, barely 3 feet from him, and did something completely at odds with everything Rowan had ever learned about the instincts of wild predators. She bowed her head. Slowly, deliberately. The gesture was calm, almost solemn, as if it carried a deeper meaning. In that moment, the other bears stilled as well, as if they too were bearing witness to something sacred. When the mother lifted her head again, she locked eyes with Rowan. Not the cold, calculated stare of a hunter, but a look filled with understanding, even a quiet empathy. The cub stirred in Rowan's arms, reaching out tiny paws toward its mother and letting out soft, breathy sounds. The mother answered with low, gentle grunts, short, warm exhalations. It was the kind of sound a bear makes while nursing or comforting her young. "You're safe now, little one," Rowan whispered to the cub, his voice barely louder than the river's murmur. "Your family's here." As if she truly understood, the mother bear took another step toward him. Rowan's heart pounded in his chest, but every movement she made was calm, deliberate, completely devoid of threat. What she did next would likely fuel debates among animal behavior experts for years to come. The massive bear slowly brought her head closer, inch by inch, until Rowan could feel the warmth of her breath on his face. She didn't growl, didn't snarl. She simply looked deep into his eyes with an intelligence that felt unnervingly human, as if she was trying to figure out who he really was. Not just his face, but his heart. It was as though she could see into his soul, grasping the depth of what he had done to protect her cub. Then, in a moment unlike anything ever captured in the wild, the mother bear gently began to lick Rowan's face, a tender, unexpected, and profoundly moving gesture. Her rough tongue grazed his forehead, a sign of affection, the same way she might show care to another member of her family. The meaning was unmistakable. In that moment, she was accepting him, a stranger, a human, as one of her own. Rowan stood motionless, barely breathing, face to face with a powerful predator now offering a symbol of trust, something that defied everything he thought he knew about the wild. The moment lasted less than 30 seconds, but its message was crystal clear. Every other bear in the clearing understood it. Rowan was not a threat. He wasn't prey. He was the one who had risked his life to save one of their own. One by one, the other female bears began to step closer. Their movements were slow, composed, completely free of aggression. Even the massive dominant male who had been keeping his distance now approached the riverbank and lay down, relaxed. It was a clear signal. He no longer saw Rowan as danger. With the utmost caution, Rowan began making his way toward the shore, still cradling the bear cub tightly in his arms. The adult bears stepped aside, quietly parting to make way for him. Their eyes held no menace. On the contrary, the gesture felt more like an honor guard, an act of respect than any instinctual reaction. When Rowan finally stepped onto dry ground, he gently set the cub down on the soft earth. As soon as its paws touched the ground, the mother bear rushed over. She nudged Rowan softly, sniffing around his body as if checking him for injuries while making low, tender sounds, like a weight had lifted from her shoulders. The other females quickly gathered around the cub, sniffing and inspecting it meticulously, as if reassuring themselves it was safe and whole. Then, at last, the massive male approached. He bowed his head and gently touched the cub with his nose, a gesture that felt almost ceremonial. Rowan remained kneeling, soaked to the bone and silent, taking in the powerful moment of reunion. In any other situation, being this close to 6 of North America's most dangerous predators would have terrified him. But now, all he felt was deep, overwhelming gratitude. He had just witnessed something incredibly rare, the emotional bonds and profound unity of a wild bear family. When wildlife expert Dr. Noelle Winter later reviewed the footage captured by Rowan's chest-mounted action cam, even she was at a loss for words. She explained that the mother bear's licking gesture, usually reserved only for close family, had, in this instance, been offered to a human. It was unprecedented. It spoke to a level of awareness and emotional responsiveness in wild bears that science had only begun to grasp. It was, in every sense, a recognition and perhaps even a form of gratitude on a level never before attributed to brown bears. As the bears huddled protectively around the cub, Rowan slowly backed away, careful not to disturb the sacred moment unfolding before him. But the bears weren't done yet. Just as Rowan began to retreat, the lead female lifted her head and let out a sound unlike anything he'd heard in all his years working in North America. It wasn't a growl or a roar. It was soft, almost a low, resonant hum, as if she were trying to speak to him. The entire group responded instantly. They stood and arranged themselves into 2 lines, forming a pathway that led from the riverbank to the lone acacia tree where Rowan had set up his camera gear. They were forming a ceremonial corridor, a silent, solemn escort, offering him a safe passage from the river. "This is unbelievable," Rowan whispered, his voice picked up clearly by the waterproof mic still clipped to his shirt. "They're actually escorting me," he thought. The mother bear walked beside him on the right, while the massive male lumbered along to his left. The other 4 females filled in behind and alongside, creating a calm, steady formation as they walked together away from the water. Rowan found himself in the midst of a slow, almost ritualistic procession, surrounded by more than 1,500 pounds of apex predators who no longer saw him as a threat, but as something more. A guest, perhaps even kin. The cub, now recovered and strong enough to walk, followed closely behind its mother. Occasionally, it glanced up at Rowan, not with fear, but with curiosity. Every now and then, it even brushed against his leg, a small gesture of connection. Rowan couldn't find the words to describe the surge of emotion welling up inside him. When they reached the acacia tree where he had left his gear, the bears came to a halt. The lead mother bear turned to look at him once more, her massive head tilted slightly as if studying his expression. And then came a moment that would be remembered for years to come, a phenomenon that would captivate the world. She stepped forward and gently pressed her forehead to Rowan's, just as bears do when welcoming a member they truly trust. "Thank you," Rowan whispered. He knew she couldn't understand the words, but he said them anyway. "Thank you for trusting me." The bear stepped back and let out a soft huff, a quiet sound that carried no threat. If anything, it felt like a signal of safety, even farewell. One by one, each member of the bear family approached Rowan. Each offered a gesture in their own way. One tapped its nose gently to his arm, another brushed softly against his leg, each act impossibly tender for such wild creatures. Even the massive dominant male came forward. He leaned in and nudged Rowan's shoulder with his enormous head, then turned and walked away. Last came the cub. It sat down in front of Rowan, looked up at him, and let out the faintest sound, a tiny cry, so soft it felt like a thank you. The sound sent chills down Rowan's spine. He knelt and gently ran his fingers over the cub's head one final time, a gesture of love and a quiet goodbye. Somehow, both of them seemed to understand. This was farewell. One by one, the bears turned and began to walk back toward the trees in the distance, seeking shelter beneath the shade of the North American afternoon sun. Rowan remained where he was, soaking wet, surrounded by absolute stillness, stunned by everything that had just occurred. His camera had captured it all, from beginning to end. In the months that followed, wildlife experts reviewed the footage, analyzing every gesture, every movement. The scene was featured in documentaries around the globe. Even Dr. Alina Crowley called it one of the most extraordinary displays of cross-species empathy and emotional expression she had ever witnessed. But for Rowan, no scientific explanation could compare to what he had felt in that moment. Kneeling in the muddy river, water up to his knees, surrounded by creatures he should have feared, Rowan experienced something deeper than anything he'd known before. Something science is only beginning to understand. That gratitude and the recognition of kindness can exist, even between species that have no reason to trust one another. The brown bear cub that Rowan had risked his life to save that day eventually grew into a strong, commanding adult male. He thrived under the care and protection of his bear family, treated as something sacred within their ranks. But the story didn't end there. Rowan, the man who had witnessed that life-or-death moment, continued to live and work in Yellowstone, remaining bound to that wild and breathtaking land as if it were a part of him. In the months that followed, Rowan encountered the bear family several times during his photography expeditions, and each time, the lead mother, the massive creature with the knowing eyes who had once met his gaze with such understanding, would emit a deep, soft snort, a sound of recognition and quiet welcome to the man who had once saved her kin. The once tiny cub, once weak and clinging to life in Rowan's arms, had matured into a calm and confident bear. He would sometimes wander near Rowan's jeep, settling down to rest in the shade as if he knew, instinctively, that he was in the company of an old friend. Local Yellowstone guides gradually began to call Rowan by a nickname, Simba, the one accepted by the pride. Even if the bond between man and bear had lasted only a brief moment in time, it was enough to inspire wonder. Tour companies later launched the Rowan Hale expedition, hoping to share a glimmer of that unbelievable encounter between human and wild. No one else could ever quite recreate the extraordinary connection Rowan had forged, not just with the cub, but with an entire family of bears. Yet from that experience, Dr. Noel Winter, a renowned wildlife researcher, founded the Richie Mara Foundation, dedicated to deeper study into the emotional intelligence, perception, and expressive capacity that the bear family had so remarkably displayed that day. Rowan's story reminds us that the line between human and animal consciousness isn't as rigid as we once believed. Dr. Noel wrote in a groundbreaking scientific report that echoed around the world. What we witnessed wasn't just instinctive reaction. It was something far more profound. Values we often assume belong only to humans: gratitude, respect, and the ability to recognize when a deeply meaningful act has been done. For Rowan Hale, that day had begun like any other, seeking out fleeting moments of wild beauty to capture on camera. But what unfolded changed his life forever. He returned not just with rare footage, but with an entirely new understanding of the bonds that can exist between species. Compassion, Rowan came to realize, isn't limited by language or biology. It is a universal emotion, one that transcends species, speaks through action, and touches the heart. Even the heart of a creature we're only just beginning to understand.